Hey, welcome to the Cam Otis show. Today, pretty cool. We have, and I'm going to do my best Don Miller impersonation right now. Dr. JJ Peterson from StoryBrand. Hey, JJ, great to have you on our show today.
Thanks so much for letting me be here.
Yeah, man, this is I, I'll plug y'all's podcast again. I mean, because I enjoy listening to it. I have fun listening to you and Don chit chatting, and the folks that Don has on the show are always interesting. So
Yeah.
I do appreciate that. Uh,
Thank you.
and story brand, it's a great theme. Making your client the hero in their own story, and you being the guide. Love that stuff. But I'd like to, if with your permission, is flip the script on it and make you the hero. Oh wait, now that would mean that I should be the guide, and I don't know if that's the right.
I believe in you. I believe in you. I think
Okay,
you can do
okay,
it. See
that's
what I
great.
just did there? I flipped it back. I became the guide and you were the hero. So.
Oh.
He's good. Dang, he's good.
Inception. Inception.
That's right. That's right. Well, man, you've another one of our guests that has like done this stuff over here, done some things over here, and then now it sounds like you found a pretty good nest. But what I'm curious is what's that? What's the theme that kind of goes through all these? From theology, a
Yep.
minister to
Yep.
stand-up comedy to TV shows. I mean, you know,
Yeah, I think my mother asks that same question all the time. What is the theme here? Uh, no, I have had a pretty eclectic past, and it's so funny. We were just on a staff, Zoom staff meeting, and we have a bunch of new people on our staff because even in this kind of season, we started growing a little bit, and um, what we used to do is sit down and tell stories at lunch, and it just kind of became JJ Story Hour because I've lived like 20 different lives. And so they were saying on our staff meeting, like, we just need to have like once a week staff meeting where JJ just tells a story from one of his previous lives. And yeah, I've done everything from right out of college. My undergrad degree was public relations and communication. So I did PR for an international nonprofit and lived in Mexico for a little bit. And then from there, I became a youth pastor, actually, so full-time kind of in ministry. And then from there, I started doing comedy, and I toured for about 3 years. And then from there, I went back and got my master's and started teaching communication in theology. And also then worked before that kind of for another nonprofit that did community development in 8 countries in Africa. So I was back and forth between like Ethiopia and Kenya. And then yeah, became a full-time professor, and then ultimately moved into be dean of students at a college, and then partnered, signed a contract with a production company for a television show, a reality show starring my brothers and I, and then ended up at StoryBrand. And so it's been like, there's just been all of this kind of what felt like, to be honest, like very weird, like, oh, you're just jumping around. But ultimately for me, looking back, what I realized, and it's one of those things I think I only found looking back, is that the thread was story, like through the whole thing, whether it was working for the nonprofits and trying to tell the story of the people we were serving or the people who came and served, or whether it was giving sermons in church or telling a story through comedy or television or teaching people. I mean, really, ultimately, when I went back and taught, it was teaching people how to tell good stories. Because I taught public speaking, I taught marketing, I taught leadership. And my master's is in theology and the arts. So it was literally a study of television, music, film, the arts, speaking theology. So theology being like when in the Bible, Jesus says, that like all the law and all the prophets are based on 2 commandments: love God and love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
So he basically argues that all theology, all the law, all the prophets, everything that had ever been written were based on those 2 things. So that was my study, was how to tell the story of how people engage God or the other, and how people engage each other. So it was study of story and then teaching that and everything. So it really felt like it wasn't until I came and started working at StoryBrand. And for those who don't know StoryBrand, a lot of companies are so close to their message and marketing and what they do that they have a hard time explaining what they do. And we use story. We come in and teach them a 7-part framework of how to create their company story and put that in their marketing so that they can engage their customers more. And so I do that now, but it really feels like it took everything, my television work, my communication work, even my theology work and my presentations that finally came together in StoryBrand. And I feel like, oh, this is what I was meant to do. And it took me, 30 years to figure it out, but I feel like I'm there now. So.
One thing I wanted to jump on right on that, because when you talk about storytelling, I think it's something that comes natural to a lot of people out there, and that we all like to sit and listen to stories. I'd say we could probably say that's one of the oldest, best human traditions that we had for thousands and thousands of years, is listening to each other's stories. And I think what's interesting about that is then when you look, especially from a sales perspective, a lot of people think that you need to be selling on a statistic. I'm saving you this much money. This is what we're doing. But as humans, we don't digest stats near as well as we digest stories, and we especially don't remember stats. We don't remember this dirty little statistics for all these different things. We remember what the effect of those statistics was and how that made us feel. And I think that's something that obviously y'all have really honed in on. I think it's a really interesting side of human behavior. Yeah,
because the reality is, if we just even look at the way we think, I don't ever usually buy the absolute cheapest thing, and I usually don't ever buy the absolute most expensive thing, right? And I don't buy the best thing that's out there, and I don't buy the worst thing that's out there. We're usually somewhere in the middle. There's a few people who are on that end of like, I will only buy the cheapest and I will only buy the best. But the majority of us, really, we're looking for something that's going to solve a problem for us. And the way that you can, and if you just communicate stats and statistics without any context, it really doesn't have an effect, because I don't know why I'm supposed to pay attention to those statistics, right? And when you can put it in a story framework, and story is a buzzword in marketing right now. So everybody's like, we need to tell better stories. And what they mean by that is stories that are either going to make people laugh or make people cry, right? They're looking for kind of that viral moment, and they're trying to find some special kind of testimony or something like that. And those are wonderful and have a huge effect, but it doesn't have to be that extreme or that hard. Story is really just a sense-making device. So it's taking stats and statistics and facts and putting in the context of life, really, because story is just a reflection of our lives. It helps in many ways make sense of our lives. So when you say, well, the reason why this stat matters is because here's the problem you're experiencing. And when you engage with our product and experience and get the benefit of this statistics, this is then what life can be like after. That's a very short story. Problem, solution, success. And so you don't have to find the commercial that's going to make all the moms out there cry, or the ones that are going to make the men stand up and go, whoa, whoa, whoa. You don't literally need to be able to tell a story with your product in a very simple way. What is the problem? You are the solution. And what does life look like after for your customer? And when you can engage people in just that pattern over and over and over again, you will tell a good story.
No, that's great. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking back, and I never studied psychology, so I can't even call myself in the military, we call it a barracks room or the outhouse lawyer sort of thing, outhouse lawyer sort of psychologist. But there's something about the way our brains are wired in that whole sense of the story, and how it pulls us in, because it's like, oh wow. And if you do it right, and I think that's where y'all are doing such an awesome job at StoryBrand, is teaching people how to do it right. People get excited about that story, and it's like, oh, that is so cool, and they understand me by that. I think that's the cool thing about it.
Because really what it is, I think a lot of companies, again, want to tell a good story. Like that's everything. Even companies come to us and they go, we want to tell a good story. We want to tell our story well. And one of the things we do is we say, well, the first Well, actually, what I usually say is yes, totally. And then they come and work with us, and I go, well, actually, that's not what we're doing. Sometimes it's not like a bait and switch.
Yeah.
There is a better way to tell your story. And the way you do that is by inviting customers into a story. So you're actually telling their story. What do they want? What are the problems that get in the way for them? And then you have to position yourself as a guide in the story. So you are Yoda to their Luke Skywalker. And then you position yourself as the guide with empathy and authority, who gives them a plan, who calls them to action, and that story will ultimately result in either success or failure. That is the framework. That is the story of any movie you've ever seen. A character who wants something, experiences a problem, meets a guide who gives them a plan, calls them to action, and we know that there are stakes in the story of success or failure. So we come in and say, look, when you tell your story as a company, your customer is living a story. They are the hero of their own journey. And if you position yourself as the hero in your story of your company, then you're actually telling two different stories. And those are competing stories. You're actually literally competing against your customer, or they're a hero and you're a hero. So they go, we love your story. That's great. That's fantastic that you guys are making a lot of money off of people, but you're not my story. I need help with my story. So when you position yourself as the guide in your customer story, now you're in the same story and there's a reason for them to trust you. So that's really the whole I would say that's the biggest paradigm shift that we teach people. Is stop telling your story and start inviting your customers into a story. Tell their story and position yourself as a guide along the way, and they're more likely to engage your product or service.
So you mentioned that storytelling was kind of your overarching theme throughout your life as you went through all these different areas. Yeah. And then one question I had then, and it just came back around, was that, as you talk about storytelling, how it's important to you, and you get into the StoryBrand type situation to where you're using it to help people tell their stories and going through that process. Was that something that came naturally from the storytelling side, or was this something that was more learned? Because what this makes me think of is the sample attendee experience, which I learned how to do in school and all that kind of stuff. But the problem with that is it's not a story, it's a sample experience, and it sounds very dry just saying that title. And so was that where you came from on it, or was it just from the storytelling theme that you have?
Well, so Donald Miller is the one who really understood and created the story framework. And it's all really based on a lot of things, like historically. So it's based on even what Aristotle and Plato would describe of how to tell a good story. It's based on screenwriting techniques that they use in Hollywood. So in reality, like nothing that we teach is actually new. So anybody who's good at storytelling has been using pieces of these principles for years. So even if you've been in marketing, you'll notice, even as I say some of the things, those things have been used in great stories, great marketing, great advertising, and great leadership for a long time. And anybody who is good in those spaces, if you're a good leader, you kind of naturally do this. If you are a good entrepreneur, a good marketer, you naturally do some of these things. And so I actually came to StoryBrand, one of the very first workshops, as a client. Don was my friend. I was launching this new television show with my brothers. It was called Bad A Brothers. And the premise was my brothers and I are so not bad A that we can't even say the word. And we wanted to up our bad A reputation. And the way we did that was by traveling around the U.S. and finding those old weird laws that are on the books, like you can't.
The old blue laws, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't have an ice cream cone in your back pocket in Atlanta, things like that. And we would research the law and break those laws so we could be more bad A. And so I came to StoryBrand to brand that television show. Don was like, you're trying this new thing. I'm trying this new thing. Come on out and check it out. And when I started going through the process, I immediately was like, oh, you jerk. You did it. Like, you did what I've been trying to do for 20 years. And I think what a lot of people have been trying to do, he just made it so simple. He took all of these amazing principles and made it so simple. So I don't quite know how to answer your question other than that it was kind of a combination. Like, it was there was some pieces that I had been doing and I had learned, and kind of you naturally understand with story and when you're a good storyteller, but I didn't have the words to put it into a formula. And when I found StoryBrand, I was like, oh, it really is formulaic. And if you can learn the formula, then anybody who's giving a speech or anybody who's writing an email or creating language for a website, now instead of just sitting down and going, what do I say? How do I say it? And stressing about, you literally have a formula that says, this is how you say it. You say it, you start with your customer's problem. You talk about yourself as the guide. You give them a plan for overcome. You call them to action. You cast a vision for what life is after. And you just kind of repeat that framework. And it just became, for me, so easy. Like I actually, during the workshop, I kind of stopped working on my television show and I just started helping people around me. Because I was like, I get this. So it's a combination. When anybody like comes to our workshop, I go, if you've been doing this for very long, pieces of this come natural to you. It's actually very easy. It's not a huge mind shift. It just gives you a formula and a framework to be able to do it better.
Well, I will say, and I think, I don't remember if it's in the beginning of Don's book, you know, the Building Your Story Brand or where, but he warns you that he ruins movies for you. Right? And ever since I read the book, you know, every time I'm watching, I'm like, oh, that's not the guy. No, that's the guy. You know, I'm like, yeah, he did it to me. I fell into that trap.
Yeah, and for me, it makes them better because it makes some even really boring movies really interesting, because then I can figure out, oh, they did that wrong. That's why I don't like this movie. They didn't follow the formula.
Well, you know, I want to jump back, and because I'm curious, if you had that sort of natural storytelling sort of thing in you, I mean, did y'all sit around the dinner table at night when you were a kid, you know, you and your brothers and parents, and tell stories? Is that what y'all did?
It's funny because in my family, I was the professional comedian for a while, but I honestly believe I'm the least funny person in my family. And that was like our whole shtick. I mean, we really like sat around telling stories, making fun of each other mostly. But, you know, I come from a long line of good storytellers. My dad is an amazing storyteller. And in fact, when we were kids, when we would go on long road trips, we would listen to Garrison Keillor in the car. I don't know if you know Garrison Keillor.
I've heard the name, but I don't think I've ever listened to him.
He's an amazing storyteller. And you can probably find some, I think he was probably like on NPR and stuff, but we actually had some old tapes of his where he would tell stories about his growing up in Lake Wobegon, this little town.
That's why, yes, yeah. Lake Wobegon.
Lake Wobegon. And he was a master storyteller. And I remember even as a kid, my dad picking up tips from him of how to tell a story and even talking to us. And now it's so funny. I've actually never thought of this before until you just mentioned this. But my dad would literally say, oh my gosh, did you see how he did this? This is actually, it's kind of giving me goosebumps. I've literally never, I don't have this I didn't have this memory until this moment. You're kind of making me teary. And where my dad would like literally would be in the car and my dad would say, did you hear how he said that? Or did you see how his voice got quiet when he was emphasizing a point? And, you know, and all these things. And that is so funny. Maybe my entire career is due to Garrison Keillor, and I'm just finding this out now. You might be blowing my mind. So
that's awesome. Well, you know, you reminded me, he was one of my scoutmasters, Ronnie Godfrey. Camden knows is one of his sons, Uncle Ben, that he calls him, but Ronnie he was our storyteller, the campfire, the storyteller. And he had that gift, and boy, he would pull us in. And, you know, we're a bunch of, you know, teenage boys around a campfire at night, it's dark. And he was the expert at pulling us in and scaring the Jesus out of us with a big sort of thing. Oh, man.
And it really, you know, Camden, when you were talking about facts versus story earlier, there's actually a lot of research based on like how story engages our brain, you know, and it does engage our brain differently than facts. It just does. In fact, there's a scholar named Walter Fisher who would say he describes us as homo narrative. So like literally we are human storytellers. Like that is who we are. And that's how we make sense of life. And even going back all the way to Aristotle and Plato, they would argue in Poetics, the way that you change society, if you actually want to influence society, let's take it out of the marketing space for a minute. But if you want to change society, you have to do it through story. Mm-hmm. And they would even argue that if you want to change the masses, like actually reach the masses, you want to use comedy, because comedy is a normalizer. It equalizes everybody. And if you want to change the elite, you have to use drama, because drama is based in status. So it's the ability to have status, lose it, and gain it. The further the fall, the greater the drama. So that's why we see TV shows of presidents, like dramatic TV shows are like presidents, lawyers, doctors, police officers. They're all people in positions of power. Mm-hmm. You don't see dramatic television about garbage men or baristas, because there isn't like an ability to lose status. Mm-hmm. Comedy, though, typically, unless you have what's called an upstairs downstairs comedy, is, you know, you have like an elite president and then his secretary. So there's a big difference, and really the president's the idiot and the secretary's the good person, you know. So you can see that kind of comedy, but most comedies don't have even people of position of power and status. It's the friends who sit around a coffee shop who are searching for jobs. Mm-hmm. It's, you know, literally The Middle, you know, or Roseanne, you know, it's like that's what comedy's aimed after. And so they would argue that if you want to change society, you have to use story. If you want to change the masses and influence their thoughts, you have to use comedy. And if you want to change the elite, you have to use drama. And so it's just kind of, and then that goes all the way into a whole bunch of other stuff, what's called narrative transportation, that if you see yourself in the story, mm-hmm. you get into the story. Like when you watch a scary movie and you jump, you've experienced what's called narrative transportation. So you've engaged yourself in the story. And the studies show that when you engage in a story, you experience narrative transportation, your mind and your actions change based on that. So mm-hmm. I can get super nerdy about it, because just my PhD is in study of narrative. And so there's a lot of research out there that basically says that that story has a greater ability to impact people's minds and actions than facts ever could. Mm-hmm.
You know, one area that I think would be really interesting, as you're talking about that, with the different effects of comedy and drama, because something I had in my notes was something really similar. You talk about stats versus stories. I heard from one of my favorite podcasts, the Freakonomics ones, and they talk, and in their books they talk about this kind of thing as well. How you have economists out there who are doing great research and uncovering all these amazing things, but they cannot tell a story for crap. Like literally, like they are the driest person that you're ever going to meet in your life. And then you wind up with this whole another class of really academia, and, you know, in this case, specifically economics, where you have people whose job it is to take these other studies and weave them into an actual story so that the rest of us can understand, and then we can get an actual impact through things. And I think that one of the things that you're touching on there is the importance of having these storytellers inside a community, because you need that story in order to get everybody on the same page. Stats don't do that, because you can have different sorts of feelings about stats, but we can all see ourselves in the story, like you're saying, ability to connect with the story. And then we can kind of, you know, be on the same page with things and feel more connected with your community that way.
Yes, 100%. And I think that there is sometimes, especially in the academic and scientific community, pushback on that. Mm-hmm. Like they would go, no, if we just show them the facts, they'll believe. You know, if we build it, they will come, kind of thing. And it's just not true. And we all know that. And part of it is, in a literary kind of context, is there are sometimes ways you can, so while facts and statistics are truth, sometimes you can actually even create a higher truth with story or metaphor. And I'll just give you a very basic example, in the sense of, like, Camden, if you were to say about your fiance, you know, she's my fiance, that is a fact, right? That is a truth. And we can go, oh, that's nice. Now, if you say, she is my better half, or she is my everything, mm-hmm. that is actually not a fact. That is a story, right? If you say she's my better half, I don't like immediately imagine you going, wait, is he a cyborg that has like split personalities, is, you know, or, you know, she's my everything. Oh, really? He like doesn't eat. He doesn't, you know, but when you're telling that story or metaphor, it communicates actually a higher truth about your fiance than just, this is my fiance.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is my fiance, I love her, you know, like that is, and I'm saying it very rote because, you know, to make a point, but you could say, oh, this is my fiance, I love her very much. But if you say, oh my gosh, she's my everything, or she's my better half, now I understand a better truth about your relationship with her.
Right.
So it's not changing facts, and it's using metaphor to explain almost a higher truth.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, say, the economics of something, or even like the fact about like a vacuum will pick up dirt, right? Like that is a fact about a product. But when you put that in the context of a story and say what that allows a family to, like, you know, that it clears the air so the kids can breathe, or it allows a mom to feel comfortable in her own home, or allows, you know, like you start putting that in a story context, it tells a higher truth about what the vacuum brings to a family than just it picks up dirt at a higher percentage than other vacuums, right?
Right.
And that's kind of silly, but it really, like you said, I think the need for story in those environments, people who have like, one of the things we talk about with StoryBrand is that internally, one of our missions is to give the good people the microphone, right? Because so many people actually understand these principles and are not doing good things with it. You know, like there are people who, dictators understand how this works better than, you know, a lot of nonprofits. And so there are people who are already engaging with these kind of stories. And then there's a lot of people out there who have amazing stats about the economy, about the environment, about, you know, like building coalition together to make a difference. Like there are people who are doing great work, but their storytelling skills are crap. And so people are not hearing it, and it's not making a difference. And it actually makes me mad.
One thing I think would be interesting, this may be a quick one, maybe a longer one, is as you're talking about that, what it made me think of is like the whole name. You can talk about leadership. You say, name the 10 most charismatic people in history, and they're not good people. Like, you know, that's one of those things. Like, charisma is not inherently a good thing, but I think storytelling and charisma kind of have a lot of similarities in that. So I was wondering, JJ, what your kind of thoughts were on that. Does charisma relate to storytelling? Are they very different things? Because to me, they're seeming, as we're talking about it, seeming very interconnected. That to be charismatic, you're really just telling the stories out there.
Yes and no, because there are people who I think are naturally charismatic, and maybe even, like, say from Hollywood, are good looking and start out maybe with like a couple rungs above the rest of us with natural ability. Right? But if they don't have the ability to tell a good story, they're lost. And people who don't have that natural charisma, if they actually understand how the principles work and follow the rules, they can outperform. They can actually outperform the leader who is charismatic. Ultimately, they might get more attention at first, but the long game is going to lean towards the person who can tell a better story and invite people into a better story. Because, you know, one of the things we often say is people don't buy the best products and services. They buy the products and service that they can understand the fastest. You know, and so sometimes that's flashy. There is a flashy component to it. So I don't want to discard or discount flashiness or charisma. But it's a little bit like, if you have, let's take it back into the marketing space or in advertising space. If you have a beautiful website that does not communicate clearly, you will be outperformed by somebody who has a little bit less beauty on the website, but communicates more clearly, because people will understand how they can buy the product, why they need the product faster. So it may make a splash. That first one may make a splash, but if people can't understand what they're supposed to do, then they're out. And so it's the same thing, I think, with charisma. You can have better design in marketing, and you can have more charisma in leadership. But if you're not pairing that with good storytelling, then you're not going to succeed.
Great answer.
Yeah, I think it's as you were describing that, I was just thinking of the leaders that I've worked with over the years, and and then you go back historical, and I think this is kind of what Camden was alluding to, is the ones that could tell the story, that drew you into the why we got to get this done,
Mm-hmm.
and they did it in that fashion. It wasn't the raw stuff that got it done. It was the drawing me in through the why and understanding the why in that story, pulling me into it. And I think that's the charisma of it. That is also the story of it. So me understanding the why through the story.
Yeah.
And I think to connect the two, really, when the different people, and I'm sure we all have random different historical figures popping in and out of our heads while we're talking about this, I think that really what it comes down to is the ones who are successful with being charismatic are going to be the ones who largely are also good storytellers, because they're able to connect with people more readily like that.
Yep. Exactly.
And then they're charismatic, so they attract people naturally, and they get the beauty for them, like you were saying, JJ.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, and I'm gonna put you on the spot because I know all good comedians always have a go-to joke.
Well,
But do all good storytellers have a go-to story?
I would say they should.
Yeah.
Like even outside. Well, and I was just going to say outside of marketing, but I would disagree with what I just said. Even inside marketing, you need to have your go-to story, right? You need to have what we would call a one-liner. So anytime anybody asks you what you do, you should be able to recite what you do in a way that engages people in a story. Instead of just like, if you said to me, I actually used our one-liner a little bit earlier. I know you guys listen to our podcast, so you probably caught it. But you said, so, like I think in somewhere you were asked like what StoryBrand does. And I could have just said, we do messaging and marketing. We help companies with their messaging and marketing. That's not a story. The story is problem, solution, success. And so I said, so many companies are so close to their product that they have a hard time explaining what it is that they do. That's the problem. Then I said, we created a 7-part framework that's based on story that helps people create their story in a better way so that success, their business grows and they engage their customers more. So that's how I described what we do, right? Problem, solution, success. I gave you a short story instead of just saying, well, I do marketing and branding, and that's not a story. I invited that in to ideally what somebody would say in that moment is, well, tell me more. Or I also have a problem explaining what we do, right? I mean,
that's what I was going to say. No one saw themselves in the story when you were going through that. No one went, wow, I have trouble explaining what I do.
Yeah. So that's telling a short story. So I would say to answer your question, even for marketers and brands, for your podcast, you need to be able to have a go-to story instead of just, we do a podcast that attracts entrepreneurs and leaders in sports. You want to be able to say, if outside of this context, like if somebody just, you're at a party and they're like, so you do a podcast, you want to start with a problem. Mm-hmm. We literally want to start with a problem that your audience experiences. We then offer a weekly podcast, or however often you do a podcast, that gives tips and invites in some experts who can give them some help with their growing their business and their leadership so that they can beat the competition, something like that, just, problem, solution, success. So any marketing needs a go-to. And I think, for me, I have those 3 or 4 stories in my pocket that I know at any moment can kind of bring the house down. Right? Like some of that, of the stuff of where like one of my go-tos is I was actually randomly a dancer in a Missy Elliott music video. And my character in the video was called Fat Michael Jackson. And so that's one of my go-to stories is like, somebody will be like, tell the story, or other people now, most people go tell the Fat Michael Jackson story. And that's my go-to is my Fat Michael Jackson. But, not to be too salesy on here, but I do believe that everybody should have an answer when somebody goes like, tell me a great story, or what was that great moment? And then also when people ask you, what is it that you do from a branding and marketing perspective, you need to have your go-to story ready.
And that's so true because, pre-COVID, I went to, maybe weekly or so, some sort of networking thing, meet people and things like that. And having that go-to story is so critical because, and it's also the funny thing, and I'm glad y'all are doing this, by the way, because I'm tired of the whole business card thing and the title. Yeah, yeah, I'm CEO of
Yeah.
Humpty Fronts Incorporated. That gets old.
Well, that makes you the hero of your story, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody goes, I'm the CEO, what they're not realizing is they're trying to impress people. They're trying to be the hero of the story. And what did I say earlier? When you do that, you are entering a different story than your customer. So you are saying, I'm the CEO, I do this, da 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 da. Now, I don't really want to engage with you. That's a great story about you, but that I have to do the math to figure out why that matters to me. When you tell the customer story, so if instead of going, I'm the CEO, you start with, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs who really struggle with this. We help them by doing this, and then this is what their life looks like after. Now you're telling my story, and you're inviting me to participate in that.
I think the interesting thing on that is, because this is something I think we talked about a couple of weeks. I think it was Jake McCluskey. We were talking about it with Dad, where we were talking about how, to some extent, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, you have to have, and I'm going to use the term hero mindset, because that's what we're saying is the problem here in that circumstance. Yeah. That as an entrepreneur, you have to look at yourself in that type of way, because it's a big source of motivation for you to go do what you're doing. Whether it's no, I'm a big shot, I'm going to go into this call with confidence, or whatever kind of mindset switch you're doing. That's something that we were talking about, was you have to be able to switch that mindset as an entrepreneur. But what you're really demonstrating here, JJ, is that you have to be able to switch that mindset off, because people don't want you to be the hero. They want to be the hero. And as much as you might need to tell yourself you're a hero every morning to get out of bed, that's not what you need to be doing in the sales conversation.
Yes. And one of the things I'm hesitant to talk about it now, but I'll give you guys a little sneak peek about something that's coming out in the future. And Don is creating this. And to be honest, once again, it's changed my life. So one of the things that Donald Miller talks about, and it's going to be going into a book very soon, is that when we look at movies, there are really 4 roles that get played in a movie: hero, victim, villain, guide. Those are the main 4 roles. And why those exist in a movie is because they exist in each of us, and we actually play those roles every single day, probably all 4 in one given day. And there's a mentality that you have to have, and it's really more about mentality. So I would argue there are real victims in the world. So that's, understanding that there are people who are hurt and struggling and all that. But for most of us, victim is a mindset. We get into a victim mindset. And victims in stories, the story is never about them. The story is not about them, because if you're a victim, you stay a victim. And really your whole role in the story is to make the villain look bad and the hero look good. Mm-hmm. That's really it. So your job, if you choose a victim mindset, all you're actually doing is sucking energy from other people. You're not contributing to the story. Victims who stay in a victim mindset never tell a good story. Mm-hmm. Then the villain is somebody who has a backstory of pain. So they might have been a victim in the past, but they choose then to revenge that pain and cause pain on other people, right? Mm-hmm. And you'll even see it, like literally you'll see a villain with a scar to show you they've been hurt in the past, but then their job is to make other people feel the pain that they feel. They lost their mother, you're going to lose your mother. I lost my girlfriend, you're going to lose your girlfriend. Like mm-hmm. That's just the villain, right? The hero also has a backstory of pain, but they choose to redeem the pain and transform, to continue, like every hardship and struggle that they experience, they overcome because they're moving towards an end goal. They have an end goal in mind, a redemptive arc that redeems the pain and moves forward. So they're overcoming everything. Then the guide is somebody who's already taken that journey of the hero. They've already experienced the back pain. They've overcome the backstory pain, and now they're helping other people. So you can play any of those roles. You can be the victim who really sucks energy from other people. You can be the villain who ultimately hurts other people. Mm-hmm. You can be the hero who wins the day, who overcomes the pain and moves forward, or you can be the guide and help people overcome their own pain. And obviously the argument would be that really you want to live in those last 2, that you probably want to go back and forth between being a hero, because you have to view yourself as the hero in a story, like you said with the entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs and leaders are dealing with problems all the time, right? And so you can't just always like be focusing on other people. You have to go, this is hard, I'm going to overcome it, right? I'm going to step up my game, and I'm going to win. And I'm going to win. And then ultimately you want to say, and I want to take that experience and then help other people win. And that's when you move into the guide space. So I do think there is like code switching that happens when you're in business. You sometimes play the hero and you sometimes play the guide. Those would be the goals. We do sometimes play the victim and villain, but we want to try to stay away from those as much as possible.
No, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And it really throws back to, something I coach around. I went through Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, founded by a guy named Bruce Schneider, great guy that has 7 levels of energy. And what you described, level 1, that low level of energy, victim, sucking the energy out of everybody around. Woe is me, and I'm always going to be a victim, sort of thing. And then level 2 can be translated as the villain, because it's always somebody else's fault that I'm not getting what I deserve or what I believe I deserve. That's the villain. And then we jump up to like 4 and 5. I would translate it just as 4. I always refer to as the caregiver. Always wanting to help and serve people, but also very easily pulled into a story while you're serving people. I mean, I know that you were in your nonprofit space. Imagine you've probably felt that many times where, you're trying to help somebody and then you just get wallered down in there with them, and that feeling. And then level 5, I call level 5, as we go up to, more positive energy, that opportunist. And that's the guide. It's like, oh, what if you did this? And it's really cool to see it and hear it in a sort of different sense. And that's a lot of fun. I appreciate you sharing that.
And the guide really is always the strongest character in the story. That's the thing. I think a lot of, say, entrepreneurs and stuff is they get in a space where they're like, well, I need to be strong, which means I need to be the hero. And the hero actually in stories is pretty weak, right? Think about stories as they literally are up and down through the entire story. They are getting beat up, like often physically, the entire movie. It's a struggle. They're not really fully winning the day through the whole movie. And so it's this up and down thing that they're overcoming problems. So they're strong in that they're continuing to move forward, but they're really like, all of a sudden they'll get the promotion and then they have self-doubt, and then they become selfish, and then they get back and they're like kind to somebody, and then they turn around and become mean. They're like this the whole movie. It's not till the end that they fully transformed and can really ultimately help other people. And so there's a understanding where being a hero is good because it's about overcoming problems and transforming yourself, becoming a better version of yourself, winning the day. But really, Yoda is always stronger than Luke, right? In the movie, we know that Luke is the hero, but Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi are the strong ones. We know that they're the guides, even though the movie isn't about them. In Mary Poppins, actually, Mary Poppins is the guide. She's not the hero. The dad is the hero because he's the one who ultimately transforms. She helps them. So she's the strongest character. So when you were saying, like, earlier you mentioned like that when you watch movies, Don ruined them for you and you're looking for who the guide is in the movie.
Yeah.
One of the things to understand of who the guide is in the movie, it's the person who doesn't change. It's the person who's steady through the thing. And I was just watching Greatest Showman. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yes, that's a fun show to watch. Yeah.
Yeah, well, his wife is one of the guides. Sometimes there's multiple guides because the wife doesn't change. She's always like, the joy that I find is not based in money or success or fame. She even leaves her family for that, and then leaves him for a time because he like is going after this, and she's like, all I wanted was you and my 2 kids. That is consistent through the whole movie and brings him back to himself, where they do the final song that's like, from now on, like you're my home kind of thing. So she's the guide. So you're always looking for whoever's the person who doesn't change and is solid. That's the guide in the story. And even for marketers and leaders, it doesn't mean that you can't be vulnerable or like be like, hey, I struggle with this, But what it does mean is you stand firm in your ability to know that you can solve problems for your clients or the people who are following you, who are listening to your speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that you are saying, I understand your pain because I've been there, but I've also found a way forward and I'm going to show you out as well. So it's steady. It's not like then you go, oh man, maybe we don't know what we're doing, right? Like think of any brand that would do that, of like going, oh, maybe this mattress isn't the best. It's not, maybe it's not, but when you understand the story, like your customer story, you can say, hey, this isn't your story. Like one of the examples I use is if parents came to like Coach or Gucci handbags and said, hey, we need a cheap version of this for our kids to go to school. The brand shouldn't say, oh, maybe that is what we should do. No, the brand should say, that's not actually the story that we help people live. Mm-hmm. You need to go to JanSport or Hello Kitty or something. Your kids can get yogurt all over their backpack at school and it not ruin it. But that's not who we are. Or if BMW, if somebody was like, hey, we just need a cheap version of this, like that's actually not who we are. We keep our standards high. We have good safety measures and we're not going to compromise. If you want to come into that story, then we're your guide. But if you don't, then, maybe you should go look somewhere else. And that's not weakness. It's really just staying the course and saying, this is the story we're inviting you into. And we are the guide for this type of person. And you stay steady the whole way. You'll see it in movies, and good branding does that as well.
So I wanted to flip the perspective, a little bit of devil's advocate going on here.
Yeah.
We're talking a lot about mindset switching, right? And where we really started this conversation off on was that you have to switch off the hero mindset so you can try to be the guide and to sell it to people that way. So what's wrong with guides then? Why aren't we guides all the time? I want to go against being a guide a little bit on this one. Why can't you just be a guide every single day? All the time.
I think you can. Like when it comes to, where I can't is I can't guide myself. So that's the part of it, is that like I deal with very specific problems that I am not able to help myself out of, whether it's relational or whether it's fixing my washer and dryer, right? So like, if I can't pretend to be the guide in a space that I don't actually have empathy and authority in. So I can't go, my washer dryer breaks and all of a sudden I go, I got this, everybody back up, it's kind of like, or let me show you, like I invite somebody and I go, let me show you how I think this should be fixed. No, because I don't have, the way you play the guide is with empathy and authority. So you felt the pain that your customer or the hero of the story has experienced. You know what they're feeling, and you have found a way forward. It's those two things together. You care about them, you felt their pain, but you have the experience and expertise and to move them forward. You have not just authority, but you have what's the word? But anyway, you can move them forward in their story. So that's why you don't always play the guide. If you actually move into that role, then you really become the fool, because you're the expert in a space that you're not a guide in. So I think in any kind of context of where like you're a leader or you're a brand, or you're even in family or friends that you have experienced their pain and have moved forward, that's where you play the guide. If not, then you're looking to other guides to help you move forward in those spaces.
And then it kind of comes back to like a mentorship feedback loop, to where because I get mentored, I'm able to teach people this thing, but then I still have to grow as a person. So I still need that mentorship, and it keeps feeding back around like that.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Another great answer, JJ. Another great one.
I think about this stuff just occasionally here and there.
Oh, well, JJ, I wanted to shift gears a little bit over towards your nonprofit work before we finished up the episode. Yeah. So I was super interested. So the two programs were Solidarity and Imaginarium. And I thought both of them had a really cool, from my perspective at least, underlying theme of the reimagination of trying to create a better world by having all of the different stakeholders involved. And I think that's just one of those things that it's really simple when you start breaking it down like that, but so many people can miss on things. And it's why we have really ineffective programs, is because certain stakeholders aren't involved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think, how does that process go? And obviously you're a board member on it. It wasn't entirely your baby, but from your perspective, how does that process go of making sure that you have each stakeholder involved and that they're getting along properly and that type of thing? Because, like Dad, we had Devon Hankins on, she talks about policy. Well, when you bring big ag farms and small ag farms together, they don't like each other, and so that's a very, very apparent issue. So how do you handle that on a large scale for entire cities and those type of things?
Yeah. So the two that you mentioned are actually, I've been on the board of those. My other nonprofit work was where I was PR for like specific companies. But when you're on the board and you're kind of a little bit more at that higher level, for me, it does come back to, again, story. So when at the very beginning, I know you're shocked by this.
I love it.
And I'll even equate it to other brands. So like brands also have different stakeholders who they have different customers who want different things, right? Mm-hmm. So same with a nonprofit, and you're bringing in all these stakeholders. A lot of them have different agendas, which is why like even in politics, sometimes it's hard to build consensus, because it's like one person, their biggest thing they care about is the environment. Another person, it's anti-abortion. Another person, it's you're looking at all of these things and they're like, well, this is the most important, or this is the most important. And it's the same thing with customers. You go, well, actually what I want is this. Another customer might go, well, I want this. And what you actually ultimately have to do from a story perspective is raise that up a little bit and find the umbrella that everybody fits under and invite them into that story. And cast a vision for what that life can look like. So when we all come together and we all engage in this. So in Imaginarium's case, it literally is the most common thing is making the world a better place, which is super high level. And that can be in a ton of different areas. It can involve, it's kind of an interfaith group. So it actually involves Christians and Muslims, right? Who normally have very two different perspectives on what they're trying to accomplish in the world, but we're kind of going up to this higher level and go, how in a community space, what story can we all buy into together? This story. We're making the world a better place, which means, and what does that look like for that group? It is that that we're connected to each other. Everybody is connected. Therefore, if we're connected, that means we're responsible to each other, that we actually have to engage each other. And then we also then have the ability within us to make a difference. Those are really the three pillars. Now, again, those are very high level. We're not saying we're going to change policy in the state on this, or we're going to do this. It's basically saying we want to make the world a better place because we believe that everybody is valuable and we're all responsible and connected to each other, and we have the ability to make a difference. So you start at that high level, and then you can kind of tell what we would say subplots to the story for specific things. But same with Solidarity. Solidarity is a group that basically does after-school programs for kids that are at risk. And they've shown over and over again that when you actually provide an opportunity for kids to have job training and education and are not on the streets after school while their parents are still at work, crime goes down. They have better success rate of graduating high school. They get more kids in college. Like, again, stats, it's just, but basically, now, is there a lot of competing stories within that about some people with it potentially education problems and gang problems, and also maybe even illegal aliens, right? Like immigration stuff we have going on in there. But if you actually tell the story of, we actually know we love kids, we want kids to live a better life, and we know that using these tools actually creates that for all of our kids and improves our community. Now people can go, oh, we're at that level? Yes, I can buy into that story.
Right. I think what's really...
It's discovering the common denominator that pulls everybody together. Sometimes you have to go to a pretty high level.
Stories start, I talked about earlier, stories start with understanding what the character wants. And a good story, the character wants one thing. And you know that within about the first 10 minutes of a movie, what the character wants. They can't want 20 different things. Jason Bourne can't try to know who he is from the past, while also opening a bakery, training for a marathon, getting the girl, adopting a cat. He can't do all those things. That's a bad movie because we don't know which story to follow. Well, that's what happens with a lot of nonprofits is they start going, well, we do this, and they think they're adding value to the story and they're not. They're creating a confusing story. So Jason Bourne wants to know where he comes from, wants to know his history. That's it. That's what the entire movie is about. So when you're creating a brand story or you're creating a nonprofit story, you have to go, what all the stakeholders, what's the one thing they want? And that's what we have to articulate. And once we enter into that story and say, we all want this, and everybody can go, yes, okay, and here's how we're going to get there. Subplots can come later, but you have to have the one thing that they can all agree on in order to move forward.
You know, I think what that really relates to a lot, and it's something we've talked about, it seems to permeate into a lot of different episodes, is this idea that when you talk about diversity of thought, diversity of background, all these type of things can be incredibly useful, but as long as you're working towards a similar goal. And I think that's really what you're talking about here when you're connecting these stakeholders, is by telling that story, you're taking this diverse population of all these different types of people and connecting them all into the same plot line. And so they're going to be working together more effectively. I think that's just awesome. You know,
exactly. And it's true in leadership, it's true in branding, it's true in nonprofit, it's true in all those spaces.
Yeah, well, and that's a whole nother line of thought that, you know, I talk about people and, you know, talk to businesses about what's your strategy, you know, because your strategy is what pulls, you know, that's the story of your business. It pulls everybody, you know, in that same direction. Yeah. Well, hey, JJ, this has been great. Really enjoyed having you here with us, and man, some great stuff about stories and where they come from and why they're important.
As you can see, I can probably talk about this all day.
Well, and I feel like we could too, because you know, there's just so many derivatives, and I could see Camden. I've known him for a little while. I could see Camden's little wheels turning, going, ooh, I got another one. I got another one.
Oh yeah.
Because this is getting right into that stuff that he loves to do. Not that I don't, but I mean, it's just fun to you know.
This is my nerdy area.
Put my dad hat on, you know, going, yeah, okay, that's right in his comfort space of doing this stuff. Well, I want to shift gears though, and well, first off, I always like to know what's next. You know, kind of I mean, you mentioned something about Don Miller's next book, and that sort of thing. Is that the what's next, or is there other?
Well, the what's next for us is really empowering business leaders to grow their businesses. That's kind of which is what we were doing all along with StoryBrand. You know, like with creating messaging and marketing that grows people's business. And now it's kind of like a lot of people who went to college and, you know, in the fine arts or humanities, and now they're out there in business and leadership, didn't get the training they need in order to grow themselves and grow their business. And the option is to go back and get an MBA that's going to put them in debt and, you know, and all this stuff. And we just kind of feel like we want to break that cycle of where people feel like they have to go into debt in order to get a business education. And so we've created Business Made Simple University. It's an online platform. It's called, you can find it at businessmadesimple.com or bmsu.com. And we've started putting in courses that really help people in all these different areas. So we have a messaging course, which really teaches you how story works and how to create a clear story for your company. And then we have a marketing course, which is how to take that language and put it on a website, in emails, create sales funnels. We also have a mission statement course that then takes the story principles and says, how do you get people to buy in from a leadership perspective on a mission statement? We just released, I think this week, a communication course on how to take the story principles and give speeches, do social media posts, write press releases. And so we're just kind of slowly adding course after course. We have a negotiations course that's coming out. We have a proposals course in there. We're going to be doing sales next year, and management and leadership and all these different things. I don't know if you're into the Enneagram. We have an Enneagram course in there. And so we've kind of we've looked at small businesses and people in leadership at kind of that want to go to the next level themselves and take their business there. And we've said, well, what do they need to grow that maybe they didn't get in college, and they don't want to spend the money to go back? We're creating courses all the time that are going in there. And so it's and we used to charge literally thousands of dollars for one of these courses for our messaging course. And now all those courses in there, it's a subscription service. So it's $275 a year. And because we're kind of putting our money where our mouth is. We're like, if we really want the good people to have the microphone and we want people to grow their business, we need to make this accessible. We don't want people to go into debt in order to figure out how to make themselves a better leader and grow their business. So we took a risk and we said, let's go for getting more people out there, making more people money, and be the guide in a whole new way. So that's really that's kind of our current but next thing is Business Made Simple University, bmsu.com. And that's where we're just kind of constantly, I'm getting ready to write a course on cover letter, resume, and interview skills. So that's, it's just like, we just keep going, well, what else do they need? Okay, let's research it. Let's figure it out. And let's do it in a way. So it's not just like kind of your standard, like, oh, here's how to create it. But we make it so why it's called Business Made Simple is we take kind of these story formulas and break them down super simple so anybody who's never even done marketing or never done an interview literally has a formula and a framework and the reasons behind that to learn and do great themselves. They can put it into action immediately.
And as a consumer of Business Made Simple University, I'll vouch for that.
Oh yeah.
I'm constantly in that mode of, dang, I need to block out time because I know I need to go back through that. Which one was it? It wasn't the community. I think it was the Marketing Made Simple one. It's like, I need to do that. Yeah, they're all great. I mean, I love them, and I do enjoy.
They're heavy. There's a lot of information there, but we keep it simple, and you keep the access so you can keep going back to it. And I really do. And part of why I literally have no problem pitching it because it's like I've mentioned a couple times, it's literally changed my life. Like it's made my life, and not just because I'm involved in it, but like when I help friends who are in nonprofit spaces, I can literally just walk in and go, here's the playbook. This is what you need to do. And they can follow it themselves. And I've just watched it over and over and over again, people be able to engage and grow their business and themselves because of it.
I love it so much because seeing you go through another great story, JJ, another great story. I wouldn't call it a sales pitch. That was an amazing story.
Did you hear the problem, solution, success? Did you hear it there?
And I was in my notes. I was saying, I saw the villain, I saw the hero, I saw the victim, and I saw the guide. It's all there.
It is. I take my own advice.
I love it.
So I'm gonna help walk us back to the barn a bit and talk about what we learned. And I am 100% confident it is my turn to go first, Camden. 100% confident on that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I don't question it anymore. You can just go first.
Well, I got the dad trump card. That's all. Mine was the drama is for people of status. If you want to change that, their attitude and their pull them in as you use a story that is dramatic. And I think that's really interesting because then, they relate to it, because they have status and their fear is losing status. So they relate to it. I thought that was, that's a really interesting perspective that I hadn't heard before. So that's it for me. Camden, how about you?
So I had that written down as well, so I shouldn't have let you go first. But
that's why I went first.
And the other side of it, very interesting as well. As soon as you say it's so obvious, but that comedy is for all. Like that, the comedy is a great connector in that sense. It's so obvious, but just one of those things needs to be spelled out sometimes. But what I was going to switch to then instead, a little bit of an Omaha action for Peyton Manning, is the connection between charisma and storytelling. I thought that was really interesting how you talked about JJ, how as somebody who's really charismatic, you kind of get your foot in the door, but in order to open up the rest of the way, you still have to be a good storyteller. Yeah. And I thought that painted a great picture for me because you're such a great storyteller.
Well, thank you. Well, I will say what I learned because it was that Garrison Keillor changed my life, and I can thank my dad for that. I've even now I'm literally just started kind of tearing up a little bit thinking about it because I'm like, holy cow, all the way back then I was learning from my dad as a storyteller in Garrison Keillor. Changed my life.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I'll throw something out there because it popped into my head, you know, because I like Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe's a great guy, and he's got a couple of shows, and one of his shows that he started about a year or so ago is The Way I Heard It, as a derivative of Paul Harvey's, you know, the rest of the story. And I'm sitting here thinking, as you're talking about Garrison Keillor and Wake Wobegon, I'm thinking there might be something in the works for JJ. You know, I don't know. I don't know a lake in the Nashville area. But if I did, I would use that as a reference.
I actually thought about recently of starting a podcast that's just called Tell Me a Story. I'm sure somebody has already found that, but like, you know, just to be able to start out a podcast either for myself or a guest and just go, you know what, tell me a story. And just kind of like, and get like, you know, like you said, what's that go-to story that you have at any party? And just like, let's hear these stories from great storytellers and learn from it, but really just have fun and kind of unite people under comedy and drama and all of those things. So
I think that's, you know, really to bring it all together, when we're talking about podcasts and storytelling, all that, that's really what I think makes the podcast medium so great, is for the storytelling side of things, because you really get the conversation that you can actually flow through. You can get into depths that you normally wouldn't if you were just dropping statistics. And when all of the different podcasts I listen to, when you listen to the host and they talk about why they do it, it's to talk to people and to hear the interesting stories that they have to tell, just like you're saying there, JJ.
Yep. You can get into the long form of it. I love it.
Well, great. JJ, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way? You mentioned businessmadesimple.com, correct?
Yep. bmsu.com. That's kind of that. And then also, if you're just more specifically interested in StoryBrand specific, the marketing and messaging side, that's StoryBrand.com.
Awesome. Well, great, man. I really appreciate it. And great having you on the show today. Camden.
Last.
Great. Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all again for listening to today's show. Special thanks to Dr. JJ Peterson. Thanks, Dad, for joining us today. And our sponsors, MASH, Military and Athletic Strength Hemp Oil, and Verbi Virtual Events. You can check out recent episodes of The Cam Otis Show on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts, and check out a full archive at thecamonotishow.buzzsprout.com. The Cam Otis Show is on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next week.